I was working on a different video when it kinda devolved into this one instead. That video is still gonna happen eventually, but it has about 20 sections and I'm already at 7 pages and only 2, so that one might take a while. But this theory feels so good that I have to make a separate video dedicated to just this. I know I've been out of Genshin lore for a while lately, but I think I did a good job here. I've been frustrated with the lore of the Descenders since they were introduced back in Sumeru. In case you don't remember, at the end of the Sumeru Archon quest, Nahida tells us that she saw records of 4 Descenders, or people who aren't from Teyvat and can't be affected by Irminsul.
Irminsul indeed does not have any information on you. However, there must be something different about your sister, because as it turns out, the world has recorded information on her after all. What? There is only one possible explanation. She belongs to this world.
But nothing about this makes any sense! Wasn't this your first trip to Teyvat?
According to the records I was able to access, your sibling suddenly appeared in Khaenri'ah.
But even that wouldn't explain how she somehow comes from this world.
Something else I noticed was that according to these records, the Fatui have not classified your sibling as one of the Descenders.
What's a Descender? Paimon's never heard of it.
Look, I'm sure you must be curious about the information I received from the Fatui in return for my Gnosis, right? A very important part of the intel was about this world's Descenders. External beings, ones that don't belong to this world. Traveler, you are Teyvat's 4th Descender.
Huh? So the Fatui count 3 other Descenders before the Traveler, and his sister isn't even one of them?
That's right. My current hypothesis is that the first Descender was likely what we now call the Heavenly Principles. As for the other Descenders, I still need to verify their existence. It could take me some time.
Paimon's head's about to burst from all this crazy new information.
The Traveler is the 4th Descender, so naturally you'd assume the 3rd would be their sibling. But apparently the Abyss Twin, despite being from somewhere outside Teyvat, has become so intertwined with the world that they're not considered a Descender. This leaves 3 mysterious otherworldly entities that we get to identify. Historically, I have had great difficulty in doing that. I remember making multiple videos on people who I thought could be the first Descenders, and they were all just super wrong. But thanks to my beloved Frenchman, we now have a lot more information to work with. First, let's go over the criteria to be one of the 3 unidentified Descenders. Characters born in Teyvat cannot be Descenders, obviously, that's what a Descender is. Characters younger than 500 years old or who have been in Teyvat for less than 500 years cannot be Descenders because the Traveler is the 4th. The Traveler and their twin arrived in Teyvat 500 years ago just before the Cataclysm, so anybody who was around after that just can't be a Descender. And the 3rd Descender must have some connection to the Gnosis. The 3rd Descender may also have to be deceased, but that's pretty hard to verify, so we'll readdress that part later. Other than those 3 things, anyone could be a Descender. Unfortunately though, most characters don't fit those criteria at all. Just pick someone at random and I guarantee they won't pass everything. For example, my favorite Zhongli is older than 500 years and had a Gnosis for a long time, but he was born in Teyvat so he can't be a Descender. That part about being born in Teyvat really is the hardest to get around. But thankfully we're not completely without options. Let me take you back to ancient Teyvat. The realm is dark, damp, and lonely, occupied only by formidable elemental dragons called Viships. The strongest of them were the 7 sovereigns. Like the Archons of today, the sovereigns had dominion over their own countries and elements. The first ever recorded event in Teyvat's history is the arrival of the Primordial One and their 40-year-long campaign against the sovereigns. Enkanomian literature implies that the Primordial One isn't native to Teyvat, which would make them the first Descender. But at the end of the Sumeru Archon quest, Nahida told us that she thinks that the first Descender is the Heavenly Principles. And if you know anything about me, you know I really don't think that the Primordial One is the Heavenly Principles. At least not alone. In order to fight the 7 sovereigns, the Primordial One had to first strengthen themselves. They did this by creating 4 shades of themselves. The nature of these shades is up to our interpretation. Personally, I think the Primordial One somehow split themselves into 5 separate entities that all have some kind of psychic connection, but who knows? Literally anything could be right. But anyway, after a long 40 years, the Primordial One and their shades defeated the sovereigns. With nowhere else to go, the surviving bishops hid underwater. With the Sovereigns gone, the Primordial One could implement new life on Teyvat in the form of humanity. Everything was pretty good for humans at the beginning. They loved the Primordial One, and it seemed like they loved humanity back. The weather was habitable, the crops bountiful, the people happy, and the world was at peace. Not for long, though, because in comes the Second Who Came to ruin everything. The Second Who Came basically just pulled up into Teyvat and started annihilating the Primordial One and everything they worked for no known reason. This war is so destructive that the world literally tears into pieces. And as crazy as that is, it gets crazier because midway through the war, the Primordial One and the Second Who Came randomly decide to collaborate on creating the Gnosis. The Usurper had their functions ruined and could no longer use their absolute authority to suppress the original order of this world. To continue to subdue and control the resentments and loathing of the world, the Usurper and the one who came after created the Gnosis together. They made Gnosis to further subdue the Sovereigns, so I guess that means that the Sovereigns almost had a comeback at this time, but obviously that didn't happen. What's important here is that we know who's responsible for making the Gnosis now, and that confirms that the third Descender has to be either the Primordial One or the Second Who Came. We're told at the end of the Fontaine Archon quest that the Gnosis are remains of the third Descender.
Well, we're going to head topside to see what's going on. You hurry over soon as well, alright, Nervalet?
What next?
The all-devouring narwhal isn't here, so I'm no longer getting any interference. I can finally catch the scent of your power, what it's made of. It is the authority of the planet's primordial dragons, but with something very similar to a god's curse mixed in. It's quite a novel blend. I'm sure I've encountered something like this before. What was it again?
I do not know what you speak of.
Of course. How could I forget? You should have the remains of the third Descender on your person, yes?
Remains? I've never heard of any such thing.
According to your parlance, I believe it may be called a gnosis.
Well, that much is true. After Focalor's divinity faded, she handed her gnosis to me. But I fear I have never heard of it described in the manner that you just did.
I've been training with my master, the Foul, ever since I was young, and I have never returned to the surface since. So most of the information I possess, I got from him. It is only natural for those who are greater than humanity to possess a different sort of common sense, which is why there are so many problems in our attempts to communicate with humans. Regardless, you should probably get rid of objects of misfortune to prevent any disasters from befalling you. To live in itself is a blessing, but once a person dies, the bonds he once had with this world shall all turn to curses.
What do you mean by that?
No need to fret. These are just my personal thoughts, and my reason for no longer wishing to return to the surface.
This third Descender you refer to, who are they? And when did they die?
Master never mentioned them to me. Perhaps it just wasn't that important for me to know.
So it's almost impossible to name anyone besides the Primordial One as the first Descender, right? I mean, it's all there in the Byakuyakuku collection. Look at their story and try to tell me that they're not the first Descender. You can't. The real question is, are they the Heavenly Principles or not? Unlike the Heavenly Principles, the Primordial One is generally pretty caring and got along with humans well. Sure, humans are technically their creation, but it's not like they were obligated to be nice to them. They didn't even have to create humans in the first place. But the Primordial One also has the potential to be violent. Take, for example, how they treated the Sovereigns. But with how good the Primordial One is after that, I don't think that was what they really wanted. To create humanity, their ultimate goal, the Primordial One had to make Teyvat safe for them first. In the Primordial One's eyes, getting rid of the Sovereigns was for the greater good. But when the Second Who Came showed up, the Primordial One couldn't stay nice forever. Unlike the Primordial One, the Second Who Came didn't seem to have any motives of creation or harmony. They just wanted to take over. In a similar vein, the Second Who Came also has to be a Descender. Their story lines up perfectly with the initial description of a Descender that we got all the way back in Sumeru. But I think the name the Second Who Came is very misleading. A more appropriate name would be the second deity who came. The list of candidates for the second descender is so small that it might as well be incomprehensible right now, but I'm gonna try anyway. During the conflict between the primordial one and the second who came, a mysterious human attempted to marry a Seelie. This marriage was the beginning of a vicious butterfly effect that led to the deaths of the Moon Sisters and the extinction of the Seelies. This human, for whatever reason, was clearly important enough to change the trajectory of the entire world. Strangely, this human is also described as being a traveler from afar, which could make them a descender. The only other person ever described that way is the Traveler, who is confirmed to be the fourth. If the primordial one is the first descender, then that makes the human traveler from afar the second descender, and the second who came the third descender. I know that's all very confusing, but I actually think I'm right about this one. The Gnosis are said to have come from the third descender, and the second who came is the only good candidate for that. Now hold on, because it's about to get even more confusing. For whatever reason, the second who came collaborated with the primordial one in making the Gnosis to subdue the sovereigns in the middle of their war. I can't be the only person who thinks that makes absolutely zero sense. The only way I can rationalize that is if the second who came manipulated the primordial one somehow. I can see this playing out a number of ways. The second who came could have threatened to not create the Gnosis and let the sovereigns retake Teyvat. They could have just straight up threatened to kill the primordial one since they were already so weak at that point. Or, and this is what I think really happened, they could have made a deal. I think the second who came promised to let the primordial one retain control over Teyvat as long as they shared it. Then with their differences aside, they created the Gnosis and the story played out as I told you earlier. With them both as the heavenly principles, this eliminates a lot of issues we have with identifying exactly who runs Celestia. For the longest time, we've argued over if it's the primordial one or the second who came or some unknown third entity we've yet to hear about. But all the way back in the webcomic, Venti dropped a teeny tiny detail that I think the majority of us have forgotten. When asked about Celestia, he gave us the names of 3 primeval gods, Pangu, Purusha, and Ymir. If there are 3 gods controlling Celestia, and we know that the Heavenly Principles is supposedly the head of Celestia, then that has to mean that the Heavenly Principles is an identity that encompasses, at minimum, 3 people. 2 of these 3 could easily be the primordial one and the second who came. That would also explain why we can't figure out which god died at the end of their war. Neither of them did. Is it a gigantic stretch to say that the Heavenly Principles is more than one person? Probably. Do I care? Absolutely not! Genshin lore is all about stretching stuff to a point where it makes no sense anyway. Like, were any of you expecting to hear that Khaenri'ah is below Sumeru and not Mondstadt? Nope. This game is full of surprises, good and bad, so I might be right. I used to be so confident in my Genshin theories, but the lore has become so convoluted that I feel like everything is a shot in the dark these days. And I feel like I say this in every video now, but I'm sorry it took me so long to upload again. School has been unreal in the worst imaginable way lately, so tragically that had to take precedence. To be honest, if you had asked me a couple years ago if I prioritized Genshin over school, I would have said yes. Never thought I'd say this, but be like me, don't let Genshin control your life like it used to control mine. My mom texted me last week to ask my favorite Genshin character is, and this is what I said. So don't worry, I still love Genshin and I'm not going anywhere. But this is probably the last time I'll upload this year, so thanks for sticking around. Thank you so much for liking, commenting, and subscribing, and I'll see you guys next time. Oh, there's people like moving out right now, moving out of their dorms in this parking lot. And I'm sitting here like a freak at night recording a video in my car turned off. Oh my gosh, people are gonna think I'm crazy. It's okay. Genshin makes you act like an insane person.